Princess Zara Valthani stood before the massive crystalline windows of her family's palace, watching the twin suns of Kepler 442 be cast their amber light across the purple grasslands below. Her delicate blue skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that betrayed her inner turmoil. Despite her best efforts to maintain the stoic composure expected of Valthani royalty, the intricate silver tattoos that marked her noble bloodline seemed to pulse with each rapid heartbeat, a telltale sign that any member of her species would recognize as distress. The summons from her father had come at dawn, delivered by a nervous servant who couldn't meet her eyes. Now, as she made her way through the corridors lined with floating crystal sculptures and holographic displays of their ancestral achievements, Zara felt the weight of tradition pressing down upon her shoulders like a physical force. The Valthani Empire had ruled this sector of the galaxy for 3 millennia, their advanced biotechnology and diplomatic prowess making them invaluable mediators in interspecies conflicts. But that same tradition now demanded a sacrifice she wasn't prepared to make. Emperor Thane Valthani awaited her in his private study, surrounded by floating data streams that showed the current state of their galactic neighbors. His expression was grave, the bioluminescent patterns on his face dim with worry. At nearly 400 years old, he had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, but the current crisis was unlike anything in recorded history. The Skarn Collective, a militant insectoid race from the Outer Rim, had been systematically conquering world after world. Their technology somehow adapted to counter every known defense system. "Daughter," he began without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "the Alliance Council has reached a decision. The Human Federation has agreed to provide military assistance against the Skarn threat, but they demand a significant gesture of trust and commitment from our side." Zara felt her stomach drop even before he continued. She had heard whispers in the court about marriage alliances, ancient political tools that her people had used for centuries to cement important relationships. But surely her father wouldn't consider such an archaic practice now. In these modern times, when individual choice was supposed to matter more than political expediency. "You will marry Commander Marcus Chun of the Human Military," the Emperor announced, his tone brooking no argument. "He leads their most elite fighting force and has never lost a battle. The ceremony will take place in 1 standard week, and you will accompany him to the front lines to serve as our official liaison." The words hit Zara like a physical blow. Humans were barely more than primitives in her mind, having only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 2 centuries. They were known throughout the galaxy for their aggressive nature and their disturbing tendency to solve problems through violence rather than diplomacy. Their short lifespans made them reckless, their emotions volatile, and their technology crude compared to the elegant biomechanical systems her people had perfected over millennia. "Father, surely there must be another way," she protested, her bioluminescent patterns now flashing bright red in obvious defiance. "I've studied human culture, and they're barely civilized. Their mating rituals are primitive, their social structures chaotic, and their military tactics rely heavily on what they call controlled aggression. How can you expect me to bond with such a creature?" The Emperor's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. "I know this is difficult, Zara, but you are my daughter and heir to the throne. Sometimes leaders must make personal sacrifices for the greater good. The Skarn have already consumed 12 systems, and our conventional forces are proving inadequate. The humans may be young and rough around the edges, but their military record speaks for itself. They've never been conquered, and they've won conflicts against species with supposedly superior technology." Zara turned back to the window, her mind racing through possibilities for escape or delay. Perhaps she could claim illness or request time for proper diplomatic preparation. But she knew her father too well. Once he made a decision of this magnitude, nothing would change his mind. The survival of their people hung in the balance, and personal happiness was a luxury they couldn't afford. "What do you know about this Commander Chun?" she asked finally, resigned to gathering intelligence about her fate. "He's 32 years old by human standards, which makes him relatively young but experienced in their military hierarchy. He's led successful campaigns against the Zephyrian raiders and was instrumental in the liberation of the Tau Ceti colonies. His psychological profile indicates high intelligence, strong leadership abilities, and what humans call tactical creativity. He's also apparently learned our language and customs in preparation for this arrangement. The fact that the human had bothered to study her culture was mildly encouraging, but Zara still felt like a prize being awarded to a barbarian chieftain. She had spent her life preparing to lead her people through diplomacy and wisdom, not to become the bride of an alien warrior whose species was known for their disturbing tendency to find violence entertaining. As she stood there contemplating her future, Zara couldn't help but wonder what kind of man would agree to marry a complete stranger from an alien species, especially when that marriage was clearly a political transaction, rather than a union based on mutual attraction or compatibility. Was he as reluctant as she was, or did humans truly lack the emotional sophistication to understand the gravity of such an arrangement? Either way, in 7 days she would find herself bound to a creature whose very nature seemed to contradict everything she had been taught about civilized behavior. The next week would be the longest of her life, filled with preparation ceremonies, diplomatic briefings, and the constant reminder that her personal desires meant nothing in the face of galactic politics. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the small, treacherous part of her mind that wondered what it would be like to meet someone who had never known defeat in battle. The human delegation arrived precisely on schedule, their ships cutting through the atmosphere with an efficiency that surprised Zara despite her preconceptions. From her position in the palace's highest tower, she watched the sleek vessels land with mechanical precision, their design philosophy clearly favoring function over the aesthetic elegance that Velthani culture prized. The ships were angular, utilitarian, and somehow managed to look dangerous even when simply sitting on the landing pad. Commander Marcus Chen emerged from the lead vessel wearing what appeared to be a formal military uniform, though by Velthani standards it was remarkably plain. No flowing fabrics, no bioluminescent decorations, no floating accessories that demonstrated mastery over gravitic fields. Just dark blue fabric with metallic insignia and boots that looked designed more for combat than ceremony. Zara felt her prejudices confirmed as she observed his measured stride and the way his security detail maintained perfect formation around him. What she hadn't expected was the way he carried himself. Despite his relatively small stature compared to her people, there was something in his posture that spoke of absolute confidence without arrogance. He moved like someone who had never doubted his ability to handle whatever situation arose, and when he stopped to speak with her father's diplomatic corps, his gestures were economical and purposeful. Even from this distance, Zara could see that he was paying careful attention to proper Velthani greeting protocols. Though his execution was somewhat mechanical, the formal introduction ceremony took place in the Grand Hall, a vast chamber whose bioluminescent walls could shift color and pattern to reflect the emotional state of important gatherings. Today they displayed the traditional blues and silvers of diplomatic meetings, though Zara noticed occasional flashes of red that probably reflected her own inner turmoil. She stood beside her father's throne, wearing the ceremonial robes of her station, trying to project calm dignity while internally dreading the moment when she would have to speak directly with her future husband. When Marcus Chen entered the hall, Zara got her first clear look at the man who would become her mate. He was taller than the average human, with dark hair kept in a strictly regulated, military style and brown eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings without appearing to stare. His skin was darker than she had expected, and there was something about the way he held himself that suggested coiled strength rather than the brutish aggression she had anticipated. The formal presentations proceeded, according to ancient protocol, with various court officials reciting the genealogies and achievements of both parties. Zara found herself studying Marcus's face during these recitations, looking for signs of boredom or incomprehension. Instead, she saw focused attention and what appeared to be genuine interest in the cultural significance of the ceremonies. When her own achievements were listed, including her advanced degrees in xenobiology and diplomatic theory, She noticed his eyebrows raised slightly in what might have been surprise or approval. "Your Imperial Majesty," Marcus said when the formal introductions concluded, his pronunciation of their language careful but accurate. "I am honored by the trust you place in me through this alliance. I understand the gravity of this arrangement and the sacrifices your daughter is making for the good of both our peoples." His words were proper and respectful, but what struck Zara was the way he had acknowledged her sacrifice specifically. Most political marriages in her experience were discussed as if the bride were simply another asset being transferred, but this human warrior had explicitly recognized that she was giving up something of value. It was a small courtesy, but it suggested a level of emotional intelligence she hadn't expected from his species. "Commander Chun," Emperor Thane replied formally, "your reputation precedes you, and your willingness to honor our customs demonstrates the wisdom that has made humanity such effective allies. My daughter Zara is not merely a symbol of our alliance, but a skilled diplomat and strategist in her own right. I trust you will find her counsel valuable in the campaigns ahead." When her father gestured for her to step forward, Zara felt her heart rate increase dramatically. This would be her first direct interaction with the man who would soon become her husband, and she had no idea what to expect. She approached with the measured grace that had been drilled into her since childhood, her bioluminescent patterns carefully controlled to display neutral courtesy rather than her actual emotional state. "Princess Zara," Marcus said, offering what she recognized as a human gesture of respect, "I've studied your published work on interspecies conflict resolution. Your insights into the psychological motivations behind territorial expansion were particularly illuminating. I hope we'll have opportunities to discuss your theories in more depth." Zara felt her carefully prepared responses dissolve into confusion. Not only had this supposedly primitive warrior actually read her academic publications, but he appeared to have understood them well enough to reference specific concepts. She had written those papers for an exclusively Velthani audience, and they dealt with complex psychological and sociological theories that even some of her own people found challenging. "Thank you, Commander," she managed, her voice betraying none of her surprise. "I wasn't aware that my work had been translated into human languages." "It hasn't been, officially," Marcus replied with what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I've been studying your language for the past 6 months in preparation for this assignment. Your father was kind enough to provide access to your academic writings, and I found them invaluable for understanding how your people approach conflict resolution." The implications of this statement hit Zara like a cascade of falling stones. Not only had this human learned her notoriously difficult language in mere months, but he had done so well enough to comprehend graduate-level academic texts on complex theoretical subjects. Moreover, he had specifically requested access to her work, suggesting that he had made an effort to understand her personally rather than simply accepting her as an anonymous political prize. "You learned our language in 6 months?" she asked, unable to keep the incredulity entirely out of her voice. "The grammar structure is actually quite logical once you understand the relationship between tonal patterns and temporal concepts," Marcus replied matter-of-factly, "though I admit the cultural context for many expressions is still challenging. I hope you'll be patient with my inevitable mistakes." As the ceremony continued around them, Zara found herself studying this human warrior with new eyes. Everything she thought she knew about his species suggested that such rapid language acquisition should be impossible, especially when combined with the demands of military command. Yet here he stood discussing linguistic theory with the casual confidence of someone who found intellectual challenges as natural as breathing. Perhaps most disturbing was the growing realization that her preconceptions about human intelligence and sophistication might be fundamentally flawed. If this one individual could master her language and comprehend her academic work while simultaneously commanding an elite military unit, what did that suggest about the rest of his species? And more immediately, what did it mean for her own future as his wife and partner? The wedding ceremony took place at dawn, when both suns rose simultaneously over the crystal spires of the capital city. Zara wore the traditional bonding robes of her ancestors, their bioluminescent threads creating patterns that told the story of her bloodline stretching back 40 generations. The fabric seemed to move with a life of its own, responding to her emotional state by shifting from deep blue to silver. As she struggled to maintain composure, Marcus stood beside her wearing a modified version of his dress uniform that incorporated Velthani's ceremonial elements. Someone, probably from her father's diplomatic staff, had taken great care to ensure that his appearance honored both cultures without compromising his obvious military bearing. The result was surprisingly elegant, and Zara found herself grudgingly impressed by the attention to detail. The ceremony itself was conducted in ancient Velthani, with each ritual phrase carrying meanings that had accumulated layers of significance over thousands of years. What shocked Zara was that Marcus seemed to understand not just the words, but the cultural weight behind them. When the officiant asked him to recite his commitment to protecting not just her physical well-being, but the well-being of her people's future generations, Marcus delivered the response with perfect pronunciation and genuine gravity. "I bind myself to Zara Velthani," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast ceremonial chamber, not merely as husband to wife, but as guardian to guardian, defender to defender, and wisdom to wisdom. Her people shall be my people, her struggles my struggles, her victories my victories, until the stars themselves grow cold. The traditional response was difficult even for native speakers, requiring precise tonal modulations that conveyed 7 different levels of commitment simultaneously. That a human could master such linguistic complexity after only months of study seemed impossible, yet here he was, performing the ritual flawlessly while thousands of witnesses looked on in amazement. When it came time for the bonding ceremony's most intimate moment, the sharing of bioluminescent essence that would create a permanent psychic link between them, Zara felt genuine fear for the first time since this arrangement began. Velthani bonding was not merely symbolic. It created an actual neural connection that would allow them to sense each other's emotions and, in times of stress, even share thoughts. No Velthani had ever attempted such a bond with an alien species, and the potential consequences were completely unknown. "Princess," Marcus said quietly, speaking in the formal mode reserved for matters of life and death, "I understand the risks you're taking. If something goes wrong, if the bonding process harms you in any way, please know that you have my permission to break the connection immediately, regardless of political consequences." His willingness to acknowledge the danger, and more importantly, to prioritize her safety over the political alliance, struck Zara as completely contrary to everything she had been told about human nature. According to conventional wisdom, humans were supposed to be selfish, aggressive, and focused on short-term gains. Yet here was one of their military leaders voluntarily placing her well-being above a strategic relationship that his people desperately needed. The bonding itself began as a gentle tingling sensation where their hands touched during the ritual joining. Zara had experienced this connection twice before, during practice sessions with other members of her species, so she knew what to expect. What she didn't anticipate was the quality of Marcus's mind when their consciousness briefly merged, instead of the chaotic, emotion-driven thought patterns she had expected from a human. Zara found herself touching something that felt like a vast, calm ocean with depths she couldn't fathom. His mind was remarkably organized, with thoughts flowing in logical progressions that somehow managed to be both analytical and intuitive. More surprisingly, she sensed no deception, no hidden agendas, no resentment about their arranged marriage. Only acceptance, determination, and something that felt remarkably like protective concern for her well-being. But beneath the surface calm, Zara glimpsed something that made her breath catch in her throat. Memories flickered past their connection like lightning, showing her brief images of battles fought with impossible odds, of desperate last stands where Marcus had somehow found ways to snatch victory from certain defeat. She saw him making split-second decisions that saved thousands of lives, coordinating complex tactical maneuvers while under intense enemy fire, and accepting responsibility for failures that weren't entirely his fault, Most disturbing was a memory that seemed to burn brighter than the others, showing Marcus standing over the bodies of fallen comrades while tears streamed down his face. The guilt and grief radiating from that memory were so intense that Zara almost broke the connection. But what held her was the way he had channeled that pain into absolute determination to ensure that their deaths meant something. When the bonding was complete and they stepped apart, Zara felt fundamentally changed in ways she couldn't fully understand. The connection remained, a quiet presence in the back of her mind that would allow them to sense each other's well-being across any distance. But more than that, she now carried fragments of his memories, his experiences, his perspective on what it meant to be responsible for other people's lives. "How do you bear it?" she asked quietly as the ceremony concluded and guests began to offer their congratulations. The weight of all those decisions, all those lives depending on your choices. Marcus looked at her with something that might have been surprise. "You saw that during the bonding?" "Enough to understand why your people follow you," Zara replied. "But I don't understand how you maintain your sanity under such pressure." "The same way your people have maintained galactic peace for 3,000 years, Marcus said simply. "By remembering that the alternative to making difficult decisions is letting other people suffer the consequences of your inaction. Leadership isn't about being comfortable with power. It's about being uncomfortable with the idea of not using that power to protect others." As they left the ceremonial chamber together, Zara realized that her new husband had just articulated something that her own people had lost sight of in recent generations. The Velthani Empire had become so focused on maintaining diplomatic balance and avoiding conflict that they had forgotten the fundamental purpose of leadership: protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The wedding feast that followed was a mixture of human and Velthani traditions, with foods and entertainments designed to honor both cultures. Zara found herself watching Marcus interact with her people's nobles and dignitaries, noting how he managed to be respectful without being subservient, confident without being arrogant. He asked thoughtful questions about their history and customs, listened carefully to their answers, and somehow managed to make each person feel like their conversation was the most important thing happening in the room. "Your husband is not what we expected," her cousin Lyra commented during a quiet moment between toasts. "The report suggested that humans were primitive and aggressive, but he seems more sophisticated than half our own court." Zara nodded, still processing everything she had learned about Marcus during their brief mental connection. "I think we may have been operating under some serious misconceptions about his species. The question is, if we were wrong about their intelligence and emotional capacity, what else have we been wrong about?" 3 days after the wedding, Zara found herself aboard a human warship heading toward the front lines of the war against the Skarn Collective. The vessel itself was a revelation that challenged every assumption she had held about human technology. While Velthani ships were beautiful, flowing constructions that seemed to grow rather than be built, the human vessel was purely functional, every system designed with obsessive attention to efficiency and reliability. "Welcome aboard the Indomitable," Marcus said as he gave her a personal tour of the bridge. "She's not much to look at by your standards, I'm sure, but she's never let us down in a fight." Zara studied the command center with professional interest, noting how every station was positioned to maximize information flow and minimize response time. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, their interactions brief and purposeful. What struck her most was the obvious trust between Marcus and his subordinates. When he gave orders, they were carried out immediately without question. But when crew members offered suggestions or reported problems, he listened with complete attention. "Your tactical displays are remarkably sophisticated," Zara observed, watching data streams flow across multiple holographic screens. "I was led to believe that human technology relied heavily on crude mechanical systems." "It does in many applications," Marcus replied without taking offense at the implied criticism. "We prefer systems that can be repaired in the field, with basic tools over elegant solutions that fail catastrophically when they're damaged. But our information processing capabilities have always been one of our stronger points," As they traveled toward the contested zone, Zara had opportunities to observe human military culture in action. What she discovered challenged every stereotype she had absorbed about their supposed primitive nature. The crew maintained constant training schedules that covered not just combat procedures, but also diplomatic protocols, xenobiology, and what they called cultural sensitivity awareness. Many of the soldiers spoke multiple alien languages, and several had advanced degrees in subjects ranging from astrophysics to interspecies psychology. "How long have your people been preparing for galactic-scale conflicts?" Zara asked during a private dinner in Marcus's quarters. "About 200 years," Marcus replied, serving her food from both human and Velthani culinary traditions. "Ever since we made first contact with the Centauri Republic and realized how much we didn't know about the galaxy we were entering. Every human military officer is required to study at least 3 alien cultures in depth, learn 2 non-human languages, and complete coursework in comparative government and interspecies relations. That's remarkably comprehensive for a species that supposedly focused on short-term military solutions." Marcus paused in his eating, setting down his utensils and looking directly at her. "Zara, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer. What exactly have your people been told about human capabilities and intentions?" The directness of the question caught her off guard, but their psychic bond made deception impossible anyway. "We were told that humans are aggressive, short-sighted, and technologically primitive. That you solve problems through violence because you lack the intellectual sophistication for diplomatic solutions. That your military forces are effective primarily because you're willing to accept casualties that other species find unacceptable. And what do you think now?" Zara considered the question carefully, drawing on everything she had observed over the past few days. "I think we may have been deliberately misinformed. Your crew is educated, disciplined, and culturally sophisticated. Your technology may look different from ours, but it's clearly effective. And I haven't seen any evidence of the casual brutality that our intelligence reports suggested was typical of human behavior. The question is why someone would want to spread such misinformation," Marcus said quietly, "and whether the same people who convinced your government that humans are primitive barbarians might also be responsible for other intelligence failures." Before Zara could ask what he meant, the ship's alert systems activated. They had reached the edge of the war zone, where Skarn forces had been systematically destroying everything in their path. The tactical displays showed a scene of devastation that made Zara's stomach clench with horror. Entire star systems had been stripped of resources, their planets reduced to barren rocks floating in space. The Skarn fleet was vast, numbering in the thousands of ships, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything in the Velthani navy. "How can you possibly fight against such overwhelming numbers?" Zara asked, staring at the tactical readouts in disbelief. "The same way humans have always fought against overwhelming odds," Marcus replied, his voice taking on the calm, confident tone she was beginning to recognize as his combat mode. "We use our brains instead of just our weapons." The next few hours gave Zara her first real insight into human military doctrine. Instead of engaging the Skarn fleet directly, Marcus coordinated a series of precision strikes against logistical targets, supply convoys, and communication relays. Each attack was carefully planned to achieve maximum disruption with minimal risk to human forces, and the execution was flawless. Human fighters would appear out of nowhere, destroy their targets, and disappear before the Skarn could mount an effective response. "This is incredible," Zara breathed, watching the tactical situation unfold. "You're not trying to destroy their entire fleet. You're trying to make it impossible for them to coordinate effectively." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "The Skarn are individually formidable fighters, but their command structure depends heavily on centralized control. Disrupt their communications and supply lines, and their numerical advantage becomes a liability rather than an asset." What impressed Zara even more was the way human forces adapted their tactics in real time. When the Skarn began using new defensive formations, the human fleet immediately shifted to different attack patterns. When enemy forces tried to protect their supply lines, human commanders found new targets that forced the enemy to spread their defenses even thinner. It was like watching a master chess player facing an opponent who could only think one move ahead. Your people have been studying the Skarn for months, haven't they? Zara realized. This entire campaign was planned long before the formal alliance was announced. Since the day we learned about the threat, Marcus confirmed. One advantage of being supposedly primitive is that more advanced species tend to underestimate your intelligence-gathering capabilities. The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. If humans had been secretly studying the Skarn threat for months, and if they had developed effective countermeasures before the alliance was even proposed, then the marriage arrangement wasn't just about securing military assistance. It was about bringing the Velthani Empire into a campaign that humans were confident they could win. You never needed our military support, she said slowly. You could have defeated the Skarn on your own. Probably, Marcus admitted. But victory isn't just about winning battles. It's about what comes after. The galaxy needs to see that humans can be trusted allies, not just effective enemies. And frankly, we need partners who understand diplomacy and long-term relationship building. Your people have skills that complement ours perfectly. As Zara watched human forces continue their systematic dismantling of Skarn logistics, she began to understand that she had been looking at the entire situation backward. This wasn't a case of primitive humans needing sophisticated Velthani assistance. It was a case of effective but diplomatically isolated humans offering to share their military success with potential allies who could help them build the kind of galactic relationships that would ensure long-term peace and stability. The question was whether her own people were wise enough to recognize the opportunity they were being offered, or whether they would continue to cling to outdated assumptions about human capabilities and intentions. The breakthrough came during what should have been a routine intelligence analysis session. Zara was working alongside Marcus and his senior staff, reviewing captured Skarn communications, when she noticed something that made her bioluminescent patterns flare bright orange with alarm. The linguistic patterns in the enemy transmissions weren't entirely unfamiliar. Buried within the aggressive, insectoid syntax were subtle grammatical structures that reminded her of something she had seen before. Marcus? Look at this section, she said, highlighting a portion of intercepted data. The way they're organizing their tactical priorities, the hierarchical command language they're using. It's not purely Skarn. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hayes, Marcus's intelligence chief, leaned over to examine the display. What are you thinking, Princess? I'm thinking someone has been advising them, Zara replied, her mind racing as she cross-referenced the patterns with her extensive database of galactic languages. The base communication is definitely Skarn, but there are advisory inputs that follow a completely different linguistic philosophy. Marcus studied the data with the focused intensity that Zara was beginning to recognize as his analytical mode. Can you identify the source language? Zara felt a cold knot forming in her stomach as the linguistic analysis program completed its comparison. The results confirmed her worst suspicions, showing a 78% correlation with advanced Velthani military terminology. Someone from her own people had been providing strategic guidance to the Skarn collective. This can't be right, she whispered, running the analysis again to confirm the results. Why would any Velthani help the Skarn? They're everything we stand against: aggressive, destructive, completely opposed to peaceful coexistence. Unless someone wanted the Skarn to be successful, Marcus said quietly. At least for long enough to create a crisis that would require drastic action. The implications were staggering. If members of the Velthani government had been secretly supporting the Skarn invasion, then everything about the current situation was a lie. The marriage alliance, the desperate request for human military aid, even the intelligence reports that had painted humans as primitive barbarians, all of it could have been part of an elaborate deception. We need to dig deeper, Zara said, her voice tight with controlled fury. If there are traitors in my government, I want to know who they are and why they're doing this. The investigation that followed consumed the next 48 hours. Working with human code-breaking specialists and her own knowledge of Velthani political structures, Zara began to uncover a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of her society. The evidence painted a picture of a faction within the Velthani Empire that had grown, frustrated with their people's traditional pacifist approach to galactic politics. "Look at this," she said, displaying a series of encrypted communications that human intelligence had intercepted months earlier. Lord Commander Vex Tholen has been in contact with Skarn leadership for over a year. He's been providing them with intelligence about Alliance defensive capabilities and strategic resource locations. Marcus studied the decoded messages with grim attention. He's not just feeding them information. He's actively coordinating their attacks to create maximum political pressure on your father's government. But why? Zara demanded, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. What does he gain from helping our enemies destroy innocent worlds? Power, Colonel Hayes said bluntly. If the traditional government fails to protect Velthani interests, someone has to step in with a more aggressive approach. Your people have been the galaxy's peacekeepers for 3,000 years, but someone apparently thinks it's time for a more militant leadership style. The deeper they dug, the more extensive the conspiracy appeared. Lord Commander Tholen wasn't working alone. He had supporters throughout the military hierarchy and even within the diplomatic corps. Their ultimate goal seemed to be engineering, a crisis severe enough to justify overthrowing Emperor Thane and replacing him with a more aggressive government that would abandon traditional Velthani pacifism in favor of military expansion. They've been playing a very long game. Zara realized as the full scope of the plot became clear. Create a threat too dangerous for conventional diplomacy. Arrange an alliance with supposedly primitive humans who will bear the brunt of the fighting. Then use the crisis to seize power and establish a new order with themselves in control. Except they miscalculated, Marcus pointed out. They assumed humans would be cannon fodder, easily controlled junior partners who would do the dirty work while Velthani politicians reaped the benefits. They didn't expect us to be competent enough to uncover their deception. Zara felt a surge of pride in her new husband's abilities, mixed with shame at her own people's betrayal of everything they claimed to stand for. What do we do now? If we expose this conspiracy publicly, it will destroy the alliance and leave both our peoples vulnerable to the real Skarn threat. Not necessarily, Marcus said thoughtfully. The conspiracy depends on the belief that traditional Velthani leadership is weak and ineffective. What if we prove them wrong? What if we demonstrated that cooperation and intelligent strategy can achieve what aggression and deception cannot? The plan that emerged from their discussion was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of exposing the conspiracy immediately, they would use it to their advantage. The conspirators expected the Skarn to overwhelm human forces, creating a crisis that would justify their coup. But if human and loyal Velthani forces could achieve a decisive victory while simultaneously exposing the traitor's role in creating the crisis, the conspiracy would collapse under its own contradictions. We'll need to coordinate with your father, Marcus said. He needs to know about the threat from within his own government, and we'll need his help to identify which military units are still loyal. Zara felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. She was no longer just a princess fulfilling a political marriage. She had become a key player in a conflict that would determine the future of galactic civilization. The irony wasn't lost on her that the supposedly primitive human warrior she had dreaded, marrying was now her most trusted ally in saving everything she held dear. There's something else, she said quietly. The bonding ceremony created a permanent link between us. If the conspirators realize how much I know about their plans, they might try to eliminate me rather than risk exposure. Marcus's expression hardened, and for the first time since she had known him, Zara caught a glimpse of the warrior that had never lost a battle. Then they'll discover that threatening my wife is an exceptionally poor decision. Humans may be young and supposedly primitive, but we have very strong feelings about protecting our families. As they began implementing their plan to expose and defeat the conspiracy, Zara realized that her marriage to Marcus Chun had become something she never expected, a genuine partnership between equals, built on mutual respect and shared determination to protect innocent lives. The man she had thought would be her barbarian captor had instead become her most valued ally in the fight for everything she believed in.